Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Myers-Morrison and the webinar chair for the Food Addiction Institute. And we're welcoming today Joan Kent with the Transformation Through Food, Serotonin, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I want to give you a little bit of an introduction here. Joan Kent has her doctorate in psychoactive nutrition and a master's degree in exercise physiology. Certified as a health coach by the American Council on Exercise, she has worked in the fitness industry for over 20 years and lectures widely on nutrition and wellness. Joan specializes in sugar addiction, cravings, binge eating, and metabolic syndrome, including diabetes. She offers nutrition support for mood issues, inflammatory conditions, and more. Simone de Beauvoir wrote, quote, "Confidence in the body is confidence in the self," unquote. Because psychoactive nutrition can empower clients, restore health, and improve quality of life, this quotation has become Joan's professional mission. And I'm so pleased to introduce to you Dr. Joan Kent, Transformation Through Food, and specifically today, serotonin, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's all yours, Joan. Thank you for being with us today.
Cynthia, thank you so much. Thank you so much for putting this event together. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm delighted to be here. So yes, we are going to talk about serotonin. And Cynthia and I were talking just a moment ago about how difficult it is to zoom in on one brain chemical and not talk about the others because everything is so interrelated in the body/brain. But we're going to do this. We are going to make this happen. And I think I'll make things clear. And as we also said, we can do another seminar that or webinar that brings everything back. But let's just start by talking about the fact that foods are more than nutrients. All right, we all know that they're fuel. We need them for energy. They do affect body composition, how much lean mass, how much fat we have, all of those things. And they're pharmacological because they affect our health directly. So when I say pharmacological, it's almost like you have your own drugstore in your kitchen. If you're buying the right things, you have your own drugstore in the kitchen. But what we're going to focus on today is the fact that foods are psychoactive, which simply means that they affect mental state. So they can make us feel clarity and alertness, or the opposite, foggy brained and tired. They affect behaviors, including eating behaviors, but not limited to eating behaviors. They affect our moods in both good and bad ways. And they affect our cravings and our food preferences, like what are we going to choose, and a lot more. And we'll be talking about those, so I'm skipping over them quickly. So these are just a few of the things that I hope that you will take from the session today. How to control your appetite by changing your breakfast, and how to stop craving, and also how to prevent inflammation and mood swings and more. And I just wanted to have it, those are just a few things, and we'll get through those as well. So let's take a look now at serotonin itself. What is it? Well, it's a brain chemical, and it's also found in the gut, so it's brain and gut chemical, and it's made from tryptophan. Now, tryptophan is an amino acid. And you may, because I'm sure you all remember everything you learned in 7th grade biology, you may remember that tryptophan is an amino acid, and amino acids are the building blocks of protein. That's the phrase they always use. So the body can take all the amino acids that it gets from various foods and turn them into what it wants. And tryptophan is not something that we can make in our bodies. We have to get it from food. And so from there, we make serotonin out of it. And it affects, as we've said, moods, sleep, food intake, and energy and motor activity. So let's start by looking at things about serotonin that are good. All right. And we'll begin. Isn't that adorable? I just love puppies. Okay. Relaxation and sleep. Serotonin can relax us. Now, some brain chemicals rev us up and make us very attentive and very full of energy. And 2 examples, and we're not going to go into any detail on this, but dopamine and norepinephrine, would be examples of two brain chemicals that make us feel as if we're revved up and ready for action. And serotonin takes us the other way. It relaxes us. And it can also be used as a sleep aid because of that. So serotonin is the precursor of melatonin, which is referred to as the sleep hormone. But we can use serotonin as a sleep aid and have the serotonin turn into melatonin if we're doing this correctly. What else? It affects appetite. And satiety is a strange word that refers to feeling as if we've had enough food and we don't need to go back for more. Now, it's not the same thing as satiation. You know, if you start a meal, presumably you're hungry, and as you eat, the hunger is less and less and less until finally you start feeling full, start feeling as if you've had enough, you're satisfied, and you think, okay, the meal is over, so you're leaving the table. Well, that's satiation, and satiation makes you leave the table, but satiety keeps you away. Like, okay, I had some food an hour ago or 2 hours ago, but I'm still fine. I don't need any more. All right, so that's the feeling of satiety. And it can be a general satiety. It can modulate our food generally, like how much we want, but it can also modulate specifically carbohydrates. So if serotonin levels are optimal, we might find ourselves having, let's say, if you have a bunch of carbs at one meal, you might find yourself wanting fewer carbs at the next meal. But we can also include sugar in that. Okay, so carbohydrates. When I talk about things like bread and pasta and those things, I tend to use the word starches, and you'll hear me say that because carbohydrates is misleading. I think as a general rule, people tend to say carbs when they mean those starchy things, but let's not forget that vegetables are carbohydrates and fruits are carbohydrates. So I tend to say starches when I'm talking about pasta or bread or cereals like oatmeal and so on. In any case, this leads right into the next point because if we have enough serotonin, we're not feeling the need for carbohydrates, which can also reduce our food cravings. And food cravings can be for carbohydrates generally, or they can be for sugar specifically. So it's good to know that we can in many ways adjust food cravings, and it's not just about serotonin, but for right now, let's just focus on what serotonin does. Serotonin can make us want fewer carbohydrates generally, and also take away our cravings for sugar specifically because that's a carbohydrate. I think it's best known, serotonin is best known for its effect on mood. So we say it's a mood boost. Several prescription antidepressants target serotonin. And when I say target, what they're trying to do is increase the amount of serotonin that's available for the brain to use. But yeah, that's all I want to say about that right now. It can also affect, and in a good way, help us get rid of sadness and dysthymia, which is a long-term, mild but persistent depression. And it can even affect anxiety. Now, I'll be honest with you, if I had a client come to me and say, I'd like you to put me on a diet that will help me even out my moods and keep me away from mood swings and all of these things that we've just mentioned, it wouldn't be just about serotonin. There's more to it. So I would work with the client to get everything balanced out. But today we're talking about serotonin. We're focusing on that. So let me just say that serotonin is involved in this and can help lessen those various moods. And it aids the digestive system. Okay, serotonin is in the gut. Doesn't just affect the brain, it's in the gut. And so if we have, let's say we've eaten something that upsets our stomach, and it's causing all kinds of digestive distress, serotonin in the gut will increase, and it will help push out that offending food basically by giving us diarrhea. Now, that may not be glamorous, but it's very helpful, and it does get rid of the offending food. So that's how it helps us with our digestion. And then there's vasoconstriction. So I'm going to get a little bit technical here. Vasoconstriction, of course, is the narrowing of the arteries, and it helps in blood clot formation. So if you have any kind of wound, especially one that has caused some bleeding, it doesn't have to be severe, but serotonin will be instrumental in causing the arteries to narrow so that you're bleeding less, and also in helping clots to form to stop the bleeding altogether. So that's important. But we're going to talk about vasoconstriction in just a moment in terms of negative effects. So it does help us in healing. That's one of the things that serotonin does, but it has a negative side, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment as we talk now about things about serotonin that are bad. All right, so let's go right into vasoconstriction from the bad side. Let's say you have too much serotonin around, because with brain, any of these chemicals, too much is not good, too little is not good, and what we want to do is strike a good balance. So if serotonin levels go too high, you can constrict the arteries enough that you end up with high blood pressure, hypertension. And this is inextricably linked with high levels of insulin. The way this works, and it is pretty much a linear function in the body, is you eat tons of carbohydrates, maybe even junky carbohydrates, and you get a high level of insulin secretion. And that insulin then brings lots of tryptophan to the brain. And the brain makes lots of serotonin. And then the serotonin, which is a vasoconstrictor, causes lots of constriction of the arteries. And hypertension can result. And sometimes people who are not doing all the usual things that we associate with high blood pressure, like eating a lot of salt, or obesity, or eating even tons of saturated fats. They're not doing those things, and they can find themselves with high blood pressure that they can't understand. And a doctor who can't, or maybe won't, check into what else they're eating might call it idiopathic, which simply means there's no known cause. But it isn't necessarily true that there's no known cause. It might just be something that's sort of out of the doctor's framework. So what can happen is that all of this insulin has caused all of this serotonin, right? And as I said, it's linear. Lots of carbs means lots of insulin, which means lots of tryptophan, which means lots of serotonin. And it really does work like that. I know it sounds simplistic, but it really does work like that. And the next thing you know, you have high blood pressure. But also, because insulin is what it is, it causes inflammation. So there's a lot going on when you start eating tons of carbohydrates. To make things a little more complex, some people are genetically predisposed to secrete more insulin when they eat certain kinds of carbohydrates. And these tend to be junkier carbohydrates. So vegetables are carbohydrates. So the last thing in the world I'm going to tell you to do is cut down on your vegetables. But if you're eating white flour and sugar and those kinds of things, and you are genetically predisposed to, you're known as carbohydrate sensitive if you do that. So if carbohydrate sensitivity is caused by eating too many of the junky carbs, and you're eating too many junky carbs, and you find yourself with levels of insulin that are too high, not only can you be getting high blood pressure from the vasoconstriction, but lots of inflammation, which is associated with many diseases. Many people say it's the root cause of most, if not all, chronic diseases. So we want to stay away from that. All right, so stay away from junky carbs. We'll be talking about how to eat to optimize your serotonin in a little while. Okay, and then there's lethargy. Of course, we talked about how serotonin can put us to sleep when we want to, right? it can be used to get us to sleep later on at night. So I would say something like, let's say you've had dinner and maybe 80 or 90 minutes before you want to go to bed, you have some carbs, and you put yourself to sleep in a moderate way, no side effects. Everything feels really, really good, and you're ready to go to sleep. Lethargy is different. It's like in the middle of the day, you've got fatigue that's interrupting the work that you can do. It's making you sleepy when you don't want to be. And then there's also kind of a sense of detachment, as in, I just don't care. And this is obviously not good. We want to care about what we do in life. We want to feel good about what we do in life, and we don't want to be tired and sleepy when we want to get work done, because you don't want to have to drink 10 cups of coffee just to get yourself through your working day. So we have to know not to eat too many carbohydrates that are going to make us feel lethargic, because if serotonin gets too high, think of that nice sleepy relaxation just kind of taken over the top into lethargy. And then there's the exercise effect. I think what a lot of people say about exercise is that it's great because it triggers serotonin. Oh, exercise! I've heard people say exercise gives you serotonin, and they say this as if it's wonderful. Well, it can be wonderful. So let's look at this. Let me divide up the population that I'm talking to. If you are someone who, and I'm kind of making this up now, but if you work out for 30, 45, maybe even 60 minutes, and you do that, and you feel as if at the end, all right, I'm tired, I've had enough workout, I'm ready to be done, but you're feeling fantastic. Why? Because you've got the effect of the endorphins, and you have the effect of the serotonin, and you're feeling fantastic. That's wonderful. You don't have to worry about this. But if you are an endurance athlete, and I have that background, and my husband was an ultra endurance athlete. Well, the last thing we want is to bring on lots of serotonin. And if you are exercising for a long, long time, you probably have to fuel yourself during those hours of exercise. And if you're fueling the wrong way, then you can bring on early fatigue, and that is going to block your endurance. The fixes that we can often find involve things like red ginseng and peony root and even acupuncture. But how practical is that? You're going to have in the middle of you're trying to do something like ride a century. A century can take you something, let's just say a century is a 100-mile bike ride. That might take you something like 8 hours, depending on who you are. Where are you going to go? You could just pull over on the side of the road and get an acupuncture treatment. You can't really do that. So there's no practicality to that. So we're just going to dismiss that one as saying, well, it doesn't really work. But then red ginseng and peony root have side effects. But the interesting thing is that all three of these work the same way, and they work by blocking serotonin. And I think that's interesting because they've been showing this not only with humans, but also with animals. And seriously, if they make animals run on a little treadmill over and over again, and then they give them a choice between just having, let's say, carbohydrates / sugar for their fuel, and a choice of that and a mixture with protein, they'll take the mixture with protein just automatically, because the protein will help to block the serotonin. And they know, well, if I've got to do this for a long time, I want to get rid of that serotonin. They don't know it intellectually, but they figure it out, and so they stay away. So if you have been doing anything for a lengthy time when you work out, and you've been consuming, because this is what you find mostly, and you've been consuming things like sugary beverages and I don't even know what to call them, food bars, I guess, that are mostly sugar, and you've been having all of that, and you find yourself not able to continue, you probably need to bring in some protein just to block the serotonin so you can continue for a long period of time. And there are side effects to the ginseng and the peony root too. Let's see, the peony root will give you stomach upsets, and I wrote down a couple of these because sometimes I just forget. There's so many things. Yeah, skin rashes. It can even slow down the clotting of your blood, and that's not good if you're on something like Coumadin, or even if you're using an over-the-counter, let's see, anticoagulant like aspirin or ibuprofen. All right, so you want to stay away from things with side effects. And ginseng can give you headaches and stomach upsets and insomnia and nervousness, and even bring on anxiety. So these are not good solutions. And I think the solutions are, as usual, to eat in a way that will help you. And we'll be talking about that just in moments. Do I have anything else on here? Yes, this last one, I didn't know what to call it. So I called it alcohol survival, because chronic alcohol use will actually reduce serotonin. So all the others that I've talked about on the bad side of serotonin are from levels of serotonin that get too high. This one is about levels of serotonin that can get too low. So it can affect mood in a negative way. It can disrupt our sleep. And it can bring on appetite changes and food preference changes, so that we want junkier food, we're craving junkier food, and it makes us more impulsive. And this is something that I think is very interesting, because what you could say is, like, serotonin opens up the space between thought and action. So you think a donut sounds pretty good right now, but you've got some space where you can say, but you know what? I'm not going to have that donut. It's almost time for a meal. I'm just going to wait, and then I'll have these healthy foods instead. That's without impulsivity. But if your levels of serotonin are low, you can become very impulsive, and you think donut and you act on it immediately, or you start grabbing anything that will take the place of that. And as a result, the cravings become something that you can't resist, and it becomes a problem. And using alcohol chronically can do that to you. And all of these things, of course, are more complex than we're covering here. But let's just keep going, because I think that does make the point. We don't want levels of serotonin to get too low, and we don't want levels of serotonin to get too high. And so how do we eat to optimize serotonin? Okay, what I suggest is that you eat protein with every meal. And there are two important reasons for that. One is to make sure that you have tryptophan basically in your diet throughout the day, so that when you want to relax at night and get a good night's sleep, you can call upon it and you can have it there when you need it. The other thing is to block too much serotonin at any given time. Yeah, it would be nice to say serotonin is great, so let's just eat lots of pancakes and lots of, that sound, at one time in my life that would have sounded great to me, but I've gone in a very different direction. So eating protein, and this is true when we were talking about the exercise effect as well, eating protein with your fuel mix, eating protein with your meals will help to block the effect of serotonin. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing. So here are things to avoid that will bring up serotonin too high. Avoid starches all alone. So even if you're only having a small meal, add to that protein, as I just said, and some good healthy fats, and some vegetables as well. So you've made like a little mini meal out of this, rather than just saying, okay, I want a snack, I'm going to grab these crackers. Okay, that would be an example pretty much of an all starch meal. So instead of having all carbohydrates or all starch, put these other foods in, even if it's small, and that can help minimize the insulin and therefore minimize the serotonin. I'll say again, it's a linear function. Okay, junky carbs, high insulin, high tryptophan, high serotonin. All right, and that can go in all kinds of bad directions. And avoid big insulin triggers, and what I mean by that are the junkiest carbs of all. Sugar would be a very obvious one. White flour would be another very obvious one. And I think I mentioned this before, but I'm going to say it again. Some people are genetically predisposed to secrete even more insulin when they eat those foods than the average person. So these big insulin triggers that are big insulin triggers for everybody become super high insulin triggers for them. And that's where things can go in a very bad direction. But if you're doing all this and you're keeping the serotonin down at night, then you can have a small portion of starch, meaning, whatever, make it easy on yourself. Go see what you have in the refrigerator. Go see what you have in your kitchen. If you have a slice of bread, go ahead and have a slice of bread. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Don't make a big deal out of it. If you have a potato left over, go ahead. You can cut the potato in half, or you can just have the whole potato if it's a small one. Just make this easy. If you have leftover rice, if you anything like that, you just want a small portion of starch alone at night, about 80 to 90 minutes before your bedtime, and you'll probably find yourself drifting off just the way you want to. Nice, relaxed sleep, and stay away from sugar. That's a whole different thing. But if you're just having starch, you'll probably find yourself getting a very nice, calm level of sleep. All right. So here's a reminder about protein. Control your brain chemistry to control your appetite. And so I say, and forgive me for the photo, eat protein first thing in the morning, and this will help to control your appetite. And I know everything here is an animal product, so don't panic, because I'm sure there are vegans listening, and they may think to themselves, well, I'm not going to eat animal products. That's okay. Just make sure that what you're having for protein is real protein. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a list of foods that are fake protein. Okay, nuts are fake protein. I will defend this point to the death. I'm serious. I hear people talking about nuts as protein, and they simply are not. Nuts are fats. They're good, wholesome fats, mostly monounsaturated fats, and so they're good for us, and we should have them. But do not call them protein. When you need protein, use protein. What's another thing that people call protein? Quinoa. Healthy, healthy food. Oh, it's so good for us. It's a starch. It's a carbohydrate. It is absolutely not protein. Another thing, beans. Beans are not protein, they are starch. Okay, so what you don't want to do is use those and tell yourself that you're getting protein. And if you won't have animal products, then let's go about this in a really smart way. Go to a place like Whole Foods if it's near you, or some kind of health food store, and get yourself a good quality uh, plant-based protein powder. Okay, pea protein powder is a good example. And yet there are others. There are just vegetable protein. You can find these. There's one I used very successfully when I went to a seminar. I was there for 5 days, and I knew that the cuisine was going to be vegan. So I know how important protein is for me. So what I did was bring with me 15, right? 5 days, 3 meals a day, 15 envelopes of raw protein. And this is a product made by a company called Garden of Life. So it is raw and it's all vegan. And when we went into the dining hall, I would tear one of these open, pour the contents into a glass, mix it up with water, stir it, and then just drink it on down. All right, was it the tastiest thing I'd ever had? Heck no, that wasn't my point. My point was I just wanted to get my protein in. And then my attitude was, okay, my protein has been taken care of, and now I can turn my attention to enjoying whatever vegetables they serve me at this beautiful vegan meal. And the only thing I can say about me versus everybody else is that I was somebody really getting protein that week. Whereas I think many people were probably telling themselves that the nuts they were eating were protein. And of course, as we just covered, they're not. So make sure that you have vegan protein, okay? Plant-based protein powders will get you through this, but eating fake proteins won't do it. All right, so let's move on now. Knowledge is potential power. and implementation is real power. So Anthony Robbins said that, and I'm just going to say, I hope that you use this. I hope this isn't just a bunch of stuff that you listened to and thought, well, that's kind of interesting, or maybe, some of it is interesting, some of it is not. But anything that you can use can really make a difference in your life. And if it's okay with you, and I want to check with my friend Cynthia, is it okay if I talk a little bit about what I do?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so I tackle big food issues, and you can see them listed here: sugar addiction, binge eating disorder, metabolic syndrome, which includes diabetes, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, high cholesterol, cancers, including breast cancer, but not limited to those. It's a big metabolic syndrome. And then there's inflammation and mood disorders, and something that I call fueling the sugar sensitive athlete, so that people who are very sensitive to sugar can find a way to do some serious athletic training and not have to rely on the junky, what should I call them, food bars that are out there. All right. And then I construct a customized health program to help you reach your goal. So with that, I have one client I'd love to introduce you to, but again, I'm going to ask Cynthia's permission. It's not a long, is it okay? Do we have time?
Sure.
Okay. So this is Howard. And I just wanted you to know that he started out diabetic and his glucose was a mess. And he was so happy when he could say what he says in here. The interesting thing is he forgets to mention that he lost 38 pounds, but let's just hear what he has to say about everything else. Okay.
I have the benefit of now having normal blood sugars. My type 2 diabetes is well under control. Every morning I wake up with a blood sugar between 70 and 80. My lipids in my last blood test were absolutely perfect. My blood sugar was perfect. My A1C was perfect. There wasn't anything. My blood pressure went from about 150 over 85 or 90, and now it's down to 120 over 60. And I'm about to talk to my doctor about decreasing or getting off my medication slowly. And I owe this all to Joan.
So he's sweet. He gives me the credit, but he did a lot of work. And the point is, this stuff works. That's the point. And I have a wonderful quote that I'd like to leave you with, which is, I do not believe in a fate that falls on men, and I put in, or women, however they act, but I do believe in a fate that falls on them unless they act. So once again, I'm going to ask you to try to use this information. If you're having any problems with your health, please use the information that we just covered. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And that's it. Cynthia, I'm done.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us to do this. I do have a few questions and want to ask those of you. And
Sure.
then, so is it okay to use melatonin supplementation for sleep? And if so, are there limitations on that or circumstances in which it's not suggested?
Okay. It's a good question, and I want to give you a thoughtful answer. And here's the thing. I have a theory, because I've always worked with food. I always think that this is the natural thing. You start with a food and then you work your way. If you're doing everything right with that, then you work your way to what you want. So if you're starting with lots of protein and then you eat like 80 or 90 minutes before bed, you eat some starch, and then that's going to create serotonin, and then the serotonin will create the melatonin. It might not be necessary to use a supplement of melatonin. And I believe that jumping into the middle of a chain of synthesis like that is where side effects come from. So with melatonin, headaches are possible. Also, I think I read somewhere, short-term depression. Okay, so depression tends to be a long-term thing. Short-term depression, so that doesn't sound very good. But then also fatigue and sleepiness during the day, and irritability or even stomach cramps. So these are not necessarily good. And I imagine some people are more sensitive to this than others. And there are probably some people who use melatonin and say, well, it works for me. But I always think the most natural way to do this is to start at the beginning of the chain of synthesis, and rather than jumping in to the end product. I've just always felt that about almost anything. But yes, I do. So I think that's a very smart question to ask, and I think it deserves a long answer. I apologize if I went too long on that.
No, not at all. Thank you. Why would you want to block serotonin during exercise?
I would say, okay, that's a really good point, because I would say that doesn't necessarily apply to someone who just doesn't work out relatively short time, not a crazy person like my husband who used to do things that went on for 48 hours. He was nuts, but yeah, but you want to make sure that you're finishing your workout feeling good, and if you are, and you feel as if you've got the effect of beta endorphin, or endorphins as people say, and serotonin, and you have that wonderful glow that happens when you exercise in a good way, you don't have to worry about blocking serotonin. But if you're going to do something for a long period of time, you want to block it because it'll bring on early fatigue. So if you want to do something for, let me give you an example of some things that I've done. I used to do indoor rowing, and I spent a day doing indoor rowing for like 6.5 hours. And so, yes, the last thing in the world I wanted to do was bring up the serotonin by eating too many starches, and making the serotonin too available. Another example was when I was on, I used to do Centuries, that's a 100-mile bike ride, and I did a few of those. And again, because they take so many hours, last thing I wanted to do was have nothing but serotonin or carbohydrates and starches, and of course not sugars. And I'm going to repeat this story because it's just a little bit crazy, but I told Cynthia about a day that I had forgotten all my good, wholesome food in my car. And I was at the start of a ride, and I don't think the ride was a century that day. I think it was something like 65 miles, but I was definitely going to need food. And as a result, I was at the mercy of whatever they were serving. This was an organized ride, whatever they were serving as the little rest stops. And unfortunately, I guess nobody told them, but they were serving nothing but junk. Every place I went, it was sugar all the time. Somebody even baked a big coffee cake, like a sheet cake, coffee cake. You have to be kidding. There were M&Ms, everything was sugar. And I was so hungry at some point, I didn't know what to do because there was no other food. And I ate some of it, and I found myself actually falling asleep on my bike. I was falling asleep. I mean, really, if I had actually dozed off, I would have been in a bike crash, and who knows what that would have led to. But it did affect me that much. I am sensitive to sugar, and I can't do it. And so I wanted to make sure. That's a reason that I would want to block serotonin. Absolutely block it. So use protein. If I had to have sugar, and I prefer not to have it at all, but I would definitely want to block it in a case like that. So it's usually long events. And if you're not doing a long event, don't worry about it. You're probably doing well. If you finish your workout feeling great, this doesn't necessarily have to apply to you. So thanks for that question, Cynthia.
Thank you. And are there some other ways to stop food cravings?
Yeah. We're getting into the one that I love. And okay, liquid B complex. That's all the B vitamins, okay? And liquid makes it work very fast. And the brand that I used to recommend, I believe, has been discontinued. I don't know why they do that, but I still have one that I can tell you about. It doesn't do anything weird. Yes, it affects your brain, but it doesn't do anything weird. What it does is provide your brain with the B vitamins that serve as catalysts in the formation of serotonin. So they're, what's the other word for catalyst? cofactors. Okay, they're cofactors in the formation of serotonin. So it just gives your brain what it needs so it can make these brain chemicals, not just serotonin, but the other ones as well, that bring your brain up to a level where you're not craving anymore. And the cravings just go away. So it doesn't do anything weird to you. It just provides the brain. Again, it's a beginning of a chain of synthesis. You're just giving the brain what it needs to make the chemicals. And in this case, it's also dopamine and norepinephrine. It's not just serotonin, but you have all these chemicals now in better balance, and the cravings tend to go away. And this stuff, I know you'll think I'm kidding when I say it makes the cravings go away, because I know what it's like as the world's foremost recovered sugar addict. I know what it's like to crave sugar and want nothing else. And I probably would have punched somebody who was trying to get in the way of me and my sugar. And I would never do, I don't eat that now, so these things don't come up. But in those days, I probably would have slugged it out with somebody who was trying to get in the way. So there was a special place I was going with that. What was the point that I was trying to make? Yes. I wanted to make sure that I had something that would take this away. I didn't believe it would work, not for 1 second. And it took it away completely. The craving, 1 minute, I was ready for any chocolate that was in my way, or any donuts that were in my way, or any cookies that were in my way. I was ready to eat all of them. And the next couple of minutes, the craving was just gone. And I didn't believe it was possible. But I'm going to say, if it worked for me, it'll work for anyone, because I am the world's foremost recovered sugar addict. I don't think there was anybody on the planet who ever wanted sugar more than I did. So if it works for me, it'll work for you.
Wow, that is absolutely fantastic. So how often do people have to take these B vitamins in liquid, B complex vitamins?
Yeah, the liquid just makes it work better. If you just take a tablet and then you'll say, wow, that's not really working right. The liquid stuff is what makes it work faster. But I would say if you have willpower, you can probably wait till you have the craving and then take it right then and there. And then these are water soluble, so you don't really have to worry. You'll pee out any excess. Your body will take care of getting rid of the excess. But you don't have to do it on a particular time. You can wait till you've got the craving. Or alternatively, if you know, if you know that you get a craving every single day at 3 p.m., well, I would say, why don't you just have right with your lunch or right after your lunch, go ahead and follow the package directions, but it's usually like a spoonful. Go ahead and have a spoonful of the B vitamins. And then you're just kind of preventing the craving from happening in the first place. And that makes it a little bit safer, because, it takes some discipline to have a craving and reach for liquid B complex instead of reaching for cookies. So you eliminate the willpower factor if you have it before. All right, at lunch, I have it. And then at 3 p.m., no craving.
Wow, that is just phenomenal. I don't have cravings now, but when I did, this would have been worth $1 million. So thank you for sharing this. I do have a question. There early in my own experience of food addiction, when I didn't know that I was a food addict, I had circumstances where I felt that I would like to have more, whatever the more would be. And more usually meant sugar. But then I would stop eating sugar periodically and find that I had freedom from sugar. But I would find that I wanted more carbohydrates then. And they weren't necessarily the fruits and vegetables. They were more likely the starches. And when I ate those, then I was back into the sugar. So I had this endless circling that brought me to in my own life to suicidality. 27 years after I knew that alcohol was not possible in my body. And I knew that grains and sugar were problems, but I didn't want them to be problems. I wanted some other solution. So for those of us who are addicts that include grains and potatoes and the starchy things,
Right.
what other solutions are there for that evening, 90 minutes before bedtime, that would not involve grains, would not involve starches?
How about potatoes? How about even sweet potatoes?
You know,
How
even
about
those are on the continuum, and there were times
right,
that I could eat those things. But
right?
as I aged and as the progression of the disease became more intense, even those things became so triggering that to eat any would be terrible.
So what about something that we mentioned before? I said it was a fake protein. What about something like quinoa or beans? Could could you eat those things, or is quinoa is a grain, so maybe you
Yeah.
want to avoid that? Well, what about beans?
Mhm. Even the level, I am, like you said, you're the foremost,
Yes.
sugar.
Yeah.
I am the foremost. You push it on to include all of those things. I mean, I got to the point that eating beans, I mean, I can have green beans, but mung beans even will trigger me. The starchy vegetables like parsnips and squashes, I mean, even things that I used to be able to eat, I can no longer eat with impunity. I trigger food desires that I don't want to have. They're not strong as cravings used to be
Right.
by just eating, like I still eat some butternut squash, but it's a very small amount because I'm so triggered by the starch in them.
Okay.
So
So tell me, would butternut squash work for you? Would other kinds of squash like kabocha or
yeah,
little bits? Okay.
little
But all
bit.
you really need, okay. All right. We can work with this because little bit is really all you need. All you want to do is shift the brain chemistry. You're not trying to give yourself a whole big meal, and we certainly don't want to give you something that's going to trigger you and make a mess out of everything. So that little bit that you feel you can eat with impunity, that's the amount.
See that.
Stop at that. So then my other question, there was something else I was going to say. What if you ate a starch with protein? Have you ever tried that?
Oh, yes. But
Will that work at
again,
all?
no, again, it got to the point, and I'm 74.
Uh-huh.
So part of it is the aging process. Part of it is the progression of the addiction, that my body has just become more sensitive and more sensitive as time's gone on.
Huh.
Because in my 30s and 40s, before I knew I was an addict, I knew that I couldn't eat some things, but I could eat others.
Right.
So, I couldn't eat this, but I could eat that, and it was okay. And then it came to be, I couldn't eat that. And it got worse and worse until I was crying because I was eating oat bran. I mean, I would have 3 tablespoons of oat bran, and I wanted more. I mean,
Yeah.
just horrible, that sugar, very similar to the sugar craving you're describing. So
Right.
part of it, for those of us that are aging in abstinence, allowing ourselves to change to help our sleep, but in ways that, can be more and more sensitive. So it may be that finding whatever those starchy vegetables are that will work, plus a protein that,
Yeah.
but can the
Wait,
quantity be very
I
small?
want to say something about the
Oh,
protein.
please, please.
Okay. Yeah, because I want to make sure that you don't block it. Remember, I said protein will
Beautiful.
block the serotonin.
Mhm.
Here, because it's at night, this is not something you want to block. So I'm going to say, if you can, if you can, you use turkey.
Mm,
Now, if you're a vegan, that's not going to work for you. But turkey will do it because turkey is loaded with tryptophan, and then you can eat some of that and have a little bit of this. Let's just say butternut squash. Maybe butternut squash is a little too sweet. Maybe you can go with kabocha squash. Maybe you can go with delicata squash. I mean, there are many different kinds of squash. If you can find one that you can have a small amount of
mhm.
to combine with that turkey, I have a feeling that this would be a very effective sleep aid for you.
Mhm.
I am crossing my fingers.
Yes. Well, these are experimental processes for individuals to try with their own bodies.
Right.
There, there is one other question, and that is in terms of those people that have gastroesophageal reflux disorder, and it's suggested not to eat for 3 to 4 hours before bedtime. Is
Okay.
there anything that they can do to help with this sleep aspect? Because with aging too, the sleep becomes disordered in some very unusual ways. So, and after grief, I mean, when people have lost loved ones after
Sure.
40 years of marriage, sleep is impaired. So what are some other ways that, I mean, they might be able to use the things you've already mentioned, but in terms of the people with GERD and esophageal reflux disorder, Barrett's esophagus, that can't eat just before bed.
Okay, let's address the GERD. I'm wondering if someone can sort of play detective in their own body, okay, and find the lowest dosage that brings on the sleep, but doesn't trigger the GERD. I'm wondering, how little can you get away with? How little food can you have that will let you feel this change in brain chemistry, but not mess up your digestive system,
Mhm.
not bring on that GERD.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
Very
it's
well.
something that you'll have to do individually and figure it out.
That's terrific. Thank you.
Okay, I
Uh,
hope that's.
oh, Joan, this has been so wonderful. Is there anything that you would like to add to any of this?
Oh, I had a great time, and I hope that this is practical. I said a couple of times, don't just listen to this and then think, okay, that was interesting and leave. Please start doing something with it. And if you have questions, then get to Cynthia and ask her. And if she can't answer them herself, then she'll contact me and let me know, and we can get the questions answered, because I think it's important to do something with this information and make your life better. You can. And sometimes it's so doable with food, and it can be so simple, and it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to take a ton of supplements, and the only supplement that I mentioned here was liquid B complex. That is the only one that I mentioned, and everything else is just use food. So,
Well, I want to close with your book. This is
ah,
one of the two books, Stronger Than Sugar, 7 Simple Steps to Defeat Sugar Addiction, Lift Your Mood, and Transform Your Health. And it's available and on
on
Amazon.
Amazon. Yeah.
And it has wonderful things here that explain about the portions and food items, and if you're going to include fruit, where and how. And the other book title, would you say it, please?
Oh yes, it's the sugar-free workout. And it's not the same kind of book at all, but it's specifically for people who want to find ways to fuel themselves before, during, and after training without having to resort to all the junky sugars that are usually given to us, in the form of bars and so on.
Well, in this one, I found it extremely readable. There
Good.
are such practical solutions that are food-based, abstinence-based, because you're talking about how to abstain and not have sugar be the addiction that it generally is, the gateway drug that it is for so many. So I really have enjoyed reading this, and I will
Thank
look for
you.
your other one too.
You're
And
my
thank
fan club.
no, I am. Thank you so much for today, and we'll have to do this again with another topic. Thank you, Joan.
Sounds
Thank you,
good, and
Dr.
thank you so
Kapoor.
much, Sophie.
Oh, Dr. Joan Kent, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.